Pride and Prejudice, Act 1, Scene 1, the drawing room at Longbourn. Upstage, wide glass doors open to a terrace which overlooks an English winter landscape. On each side of the glass doors are rounded recesses with windows. On stage right, a door opens into a library. On stage left is a door to the hall, the chief entrance of the house. A fire softly crackles. Mr. Bennet reads. Mrs. Bennet plays at knitting but is impatient to talk.
Did you know? Netherfield Park is let at last. My dear Mr. Bennet, did you hear me? Do you not want to know who has taken it?
Not especially, Mrs. Bennet. But you want to tell me, my dear, and I have no objection.
Lady Lucas says that Netherfield is taken by a Mr. George Bingley. He is single, Mr. Bennet. What a fine thing for our girls.
Indeed, very fine for our girls. Fine how?
Mr. Bennet, don't be tiresome. It is the truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Mr. Bingley is single, with £4,000 or £5,000 a year. He could very well marry one of our girls.
I'm quite certain that's exactly why he sought an estate nearby.
I am quite certain he will fall in love with one of them, and you must therefore go and visit him. Consider your daughters, Mr. Bennet. Think what it would mean for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go merely on that account. Indeed, you must go. It will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not.
I dare say Mr. Bingley would be very glad to see you. And I'll send a few lines to assure him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever of the girls he chooses. Do you suppose he'll meet them first, or simply draw lots? Regardless, I must put in a good word for Lizzie.
You've always preferred her, but Lizzie is not a bit better than the others. She's not half as handsome as Jane, nor as good-humored as Lydia.
But Lizzie is equally deserving. Lydia, Kitty, and Mary have time yet in the schoolroom, and you claim that William Collins has already spoken for Jane.
That odious Mr. Collins. I wish I might never hear his name again.
I thought you approved of him.
He is your cousin.
My dear, I don't propose to argue about the entail again. A line of inheritance cannot be altered.
It can be, but you refuse. And since you will do nothing to change the settlement of the inheritance of the estate, it will be a mercy if he does marry Jane.
I wish for Longbourn to remain my family's home, even after I'm gone. My father arranged it so that this would happen, even if that means it must pass to someone like my cousin William.
It is the hardest thing in the world that we have no son.
That was God's will. My father's will declares that Longbourn will be passed down through a direct male line.
Thanks to his strict settlement.
We have discussed this, madam.
You could ensure that there would be limits on what Mr. Collins could do, even as an heir.
I'm only the first heir. I don't own anything to limit. I'm Longbourn's caretaker, a life tenant with no son to cut off the entail. And Mr. Collins would never agree to marry into this family if all he would ever be is a tenant of the estate and not its master.
You could choose your own heir.
No, I cannot.
Including one of your own daughters. And you have passed over them in favor of your cousin, William. You could simply have bought him off and been quit of him that way.
I also could simply have paid to drive a private bill through Parliament. For all, I have financially worthless life tenancy in this estate, which I don't control and can't sell off. Oh, but perhaps our tenant farmers failed to tell us that they spun our straw overnight into gold bullion. Shall we go see?
Your chastisement is ridiculous and wholly unnecessary.
This entire conversation is ridiculous and wholly unnecessary. By law, Collins is the remainderman, and he inherits because God saw fit to bless me with 5 daughters. Even if I could let Longbourn pass to one of them, and I assure you for the 50th time that I cannot. Which one of them, madam, would you feel best with once I'm departed? Jane?
I've no doubt she could manage Longbourn.
Well, she had better marry someone as scrupulous as she is. Otherwise, her husband will be running things in very short order, not her. She idealizes everyone she meets. It's sad how simple it might be to gull her.
Mary, then. She is intelligent and pious, but not naive.
She's stupendously naive when it comes to herself. She only imagines herself to be wise.
Mary is accomplished and more than disciplined enough to manage Longhorn.
Accomplished? She plays lovely music and then moralizes at us between recitals. And her idea of discipline is keeping her pedantic vanity a tighter leash than most of us are able to manage.
Well, what of Lydia, then?
Shall we leap over Catherine, then, and go directly to the youngest girl in the household?
You always do, Mr. Bennet.
As do we both, Mrs. Bennet, and it's hardly a secret why. Kitty is Lydia's shadow. She hasn't an idea in her head that Lydia didn't place there. She's weak-spirited and irritable, and she and Lydia are both idle and vain.
That is not true of Lydia.
It is, and if you are honest, you know it. There's at least a spark of intellect there, but...
As I always say.
But you help her fritter it away by filling her head with tales of lace and bonnets and high fashions, dashing young men and regimentals.
She is young and beautiful, and there is nothing wrong with her wanting to look her best and to be entertained.
You spoil her, madam. She's always spending far more than her pin money ought to allow, which tells me that more must be passing into her hands, either wheedled from you or extorted from her sisters. Her husband and Longbourn might both end up penniless.
Do you care for none of your children, Mr. Bennet?
Of course I do. I love each and every one.
Then how can you regard them so harshly?
All of my daughters are lovely in my eyes, and each is possessed of her own fine points. But I do none of them justice if I fail to see who they truly are. The only one of them I could in any way feel comfortable leaving Longbourn with is Lizzie.
Elizabeth, of course, your favorite.
She is lively, intelligent, attractive, witty.
And as prone as you are to pronouncing judgments about people which become fixed and immovable. She is forward enough that she might frighten off every potential suitor we could find for her.
And you complete my argument for me. The only way to secure Longbourn for this family and the generations to come is through a male line. Even if I had any say over who that would be, if I couldn't trust the husbands of my daughters to honor my wishes, and if Lizzie never married at all, that would leave my cousin.
If you die, sir, every woman and girl in this household may be turned out at Mr. Collins' whim.
As you remind me continuously, I didn't intend to argue with you about the entail yet again, and this is the last time I shall. My mind is set, and the law immovable.
Here your cousin Collins has just got this good living from that grand Lady Catherine de Bourgh. He has all the luck in the world.
But my dear, that'll soon be your luck as well.
My luck?
Don't forget, your daughter will profit by that good living.
It is monstrous that, after you are gone, I shall be forced to make way for William Collins and live to see him master in this house.
My dear, we can't. No, perhaps I'll survive you.
Your humor is dark indeed. If not for that entail, I should not mind.
Nothing can spare Mr. Collins the guilt of inheriting Longbourn. However, his apology will be most handsome. He's ready to make amends by marrying one of the girls. You must acknowledge, his plan is excessively generous.
Well, might be worse.
Decidedly. With Jane so well settled and a single man like Mr. Bingley in prospect, you should be quite cheerful.
Mr. Bingley! We shall never know Mr. Bingley. You have no compassion on my poor nerves.
On the contrary, madam, you've mentioned your nerves with consideration for at least 20 years. They are some of my oldest friends. I respect them greatly.
Oh, you don't know what I suffer.
Oh, these horrid dance lessons. Jane does so keep me at it. I am tired to death.
Does your head ache, Mamma?
We shall never meet Mr. Bingley, Jane. I cannot persuade your father to call on him at Netherfield. And of course my head aches.
But Mamma, we shall meet him at assemblies, and Lady Lucas has promised to introduce him.
Lady Lucas will do no such thing. She has her own daughters to think of. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her.
Glad to find you don't depend on her serving you.
I may have to depend on her, Mr. Bennet, since you will do nothing to help me. Lydia, for heaven's sake, have a little compassion on my nerves.
You have no discretion in your coughs, but you do have impeccable timing.
I do not cough for my own amusement, Papa. Jane, when is your next ball?
Tomorrow fortnight.
And Lady Lucas doesn't come back till the day before. It will be impossible for her to introduce Mr. Bingley. She will not yet know him.
Then you may have the advantage. You can introduce Mr. Bingley to her.
How, Mr. Bennet, when I am not acquainted with him myself?
A fortnight's acquaintance is certainly very little.
Oh, I'm sick of Mr. Bingley.
I wish I'd known that a week ago. I wouldn't have called upon him.
What? Have you really called upon him? Oh, how good of you, my dear Mr. Bennet.
I've actually paid the visit. Mr. Bingley will very likely return at any time and bring his friend Mr. Darcy with him. We're going to meet them whether we want to or not. Our luck is terrible.
My dear Mr. Bennet, I knew you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. And what a good joke that you already called upon Mr. Bingley and never said a word about it. What an excellent father you have, girls.
He has no discretion in his jests, but his timing is impeccable.
Yes. Well, I'll be in the library. Lydia, you may cough as much as you'd like now.
I don't know how you girls will ever make him amends for his kindness, or me either, for that matter. At our time of life, it's not so easy to make new acquaintances every day. But for your sakes, we would do anything. Where is Lizzie? Lydia, where is your sister?
Out walking with Charlotte Lucas and that dismal Mr. Collins.
Why is Lizzie out walking with Mr. Collins? Why didn't you go, Jane?
I had to practice with Lydia.
I would have excused you. Why is Mr. Collins here, Mamma? I caught Mr. Wickham and Colonel Forrester laughing at him the day we went to Merrington. Why does Papa have a cousin like that?
He really cannot help it. It is the entail, my love. But I hope all you girls will be very civil to him. Jane especially.
I, Mamma?
Yes, my love. You see...
Very well, Mr. Collins. Mamma, what's the matter?
Nothing. Hush. What have you done with Mr. Collins?
Oh, Mr. Collins is safe. He's gone round to the library.
Oh, how providential.
But I've brought someone else with me.
Oh,
Charlotte.
Mr. Wickham.
Mr.
Charlotte.
Wickham,
How
Charlotte?
you do, Mrs. Bennet. This is indeed a pleasure.
Jane, I'm glad to see you.
And now you, Charlotte.
Why do you never come to Meryton, Miss Lydia? Mr. Denny is quite downcast.
Mr. Denny.
And many others beside him, Miss Lydia.
Well, 'tis an age since we saw you, Mr. Wickham. What have you been doing?
Colonel Forster keeps me so busy that I have no time for enjoyment.
Yes, Mr. Wickham bears all the marks of a harassed and overworked man.
Harassed and overworked, indeed, the very words I needed. Mrs. Bennet, Miss Elizabeth will bear witness that I was on my way to a business appointment when I yielded to temptation and went off for a walk with her and Miss Lucas and their irreproachable escort.
And Miss Elizabeth will also testify that you yielded with the celerity and ease of long practice.
But in this case, who was the tempter?
Very well. I will admit that Mr. Collins was partially responsible.
Oh, you must stay to dinner, Mr. Wickham.
That is indeed a temptation. But Miss Elizabeth has reminded me of my duty.
Oh, nobody ever minds, Lizzie.
Truly, I cannot. I am to meet Colonel Forster on important business on the Drake farm.
Well, I'm very sorry.
I might perhaps bring Colonel Forster on the way back. That is, if we return this way.
Oh, yes, do indeed.
Yes. Tell Colonel Forster we should be delighted to see him.
Thank you, Mrs. Bennet. And now I really must go. Good morning, Jane, Lydia. Good morning, Miss Charlotte. You must let me hear more about those clever plans of yours. I am vastly interested in them. Good morning, Miss Elizabeth. You must temper your justice with mercy the next time I join you in a walk. Mrs. Bennet, you always remind me. The daughters are lovely, but the mother is lovelier. Goodbye.
Oh, Mr. Wickham, a moment, please. I have something else to tell you.
Really, Mamma, Lydia is too forward.
Nonsense, Jane. You are jealous.
Of Lydia?
Well, she's no more forward than any of you. All of you are crazy about Mr. Wickham. He certainly is a most engaging young man.
He paid you a very charming compliment, pretty Mamma. Papa always says you are handsomer than any of us.
My dear Lizzie, I have had my share of beauty, but I don't pretend to be anything extraordinary now. Oh, Mr. Collins, there you are.
I did not find Mr. Bennet in the library, madam. Do you know where he is?
Why, really, Mr. Collins, I couldn't say. Did you enjoy your walk?
Oh, most assuredly, madam. The beauties of nature, not only in the landscape, but also the blooming countenances of my fair companions, made our expedition particularly enjoyable.
I'm very glad of it, I'm sure. Girls, we haven't told Lizzie and Charlotte the news. Lizzie, your father has just told us that we may expect a visit at any time from our new neighbor, Mr. Bingley, and that friend of his who is stopping with him.
Oh, Mr. Bingley. That will be entertaining. Do not you think so, Mr. Collins?
What? Oh, excuse me, Miss Elizabeth. On what subject did you ask my opinion?
Don't you think it's a very pleasant thing to meet new neighbors?
Most assuredly, Miss Elizabeth. If those neighbors are possessed of qualifications which redound to their own credit and to the edification of their friends. Otherwise, as a clergyman, I must hesitate in my approval. You realize, I am sure, madam, the caution which should be exercised where my amiable young cousins are concerned.
Why, my dear Mr. Collins, we have found out all about them.
Mamma, you should still be cautious.
Nonsense. Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy are connected with some of the most respectable families in England.
Mr. Darcy? Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy? Respectable indeed. My dear madam, he is the nephew of my noble patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. It is true that I have never yet had the honor of meeting him, but I am surprised indeed by the civility on his part. I only fear there may be some mistake, for Mr. Darcy has the reputation of possessing a very natural pride of birth, but I think Lady Catherine would consent to my approval of this visit, provided my fair cousins will keep in mind the proper attitude of respectful humility which should be assumed towards a person of his superior station.
I feel certain, Mr. Collins, that you shall never let us forget either Mr. Darcy's exalted position or our own insignificance.
With that assurance, Miss Elizabeth, I think even Lady Catherine would be satisfied. I need no longer withhold my sanction.
We are ever so humbly, thank you, sir.
This is the very attitude of mind I could desire. Madam, I think with your permission I will retire again to the library. Miss Jane, there was a volume of Fortis's sermons. You may recall I was reading to you from that delightful tome in this room yesterday. Do you know where it is?
I haven't seen it, Mr. Collins. I will try to find it for you.
Oh, no, Lydia will find it.
Mama!
Lydia, my love, go see if you can find the sermons for Mr. Collins.
I'll go fetch it.
On no account, Charlotte.
Miss Bennet, I'm quite sure I saw the book in the hallway.
then Lydia shall certainly find it there.
Oh, I would not trouble any of you ladies.
It's no trouble, Mr. Collins. Lydia will find your book.
But I assure you, madam.
Charlotte, if you'll come with me, I have a parcel I should like to send to your mother. Lizzie, go and get the mud off your shoes.
Miss Bennet, do you realize the honor which is so soon to fall upon our humble home and our gratefully humble selves?
Oh, Lizzie, Mr. Collins can be a bit pompous, but
Do you really grasp in its full significance the fact that we may soon be honored by a visit from Mr. Bingley of Netherfield and Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, nephew of the Lady Catherine de Bourgh?
he seems very well-meaning, indeed, sometimes quite agreeable.
No one is anything but agreeable in your mind, my dear Jane. However, I quite agree with you. He seems more than excessively willing to lower himself to speak to us, all the while maintaining his carriage by swelling his own significance. The mixture bodes well.
And I think Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy promise well. If half of what our neighbors say is true, Mr. Bingley will give us all sorts of gaieties. Who knows? We may find him as entertaining as Mr. Wickham.
Then, dear Jane, we shall be rich indeed. For hospitality, Mr. Bingley; for conversation, Mr. Wickham; and for grandeur, Mr. Darcy, and the agreeable Mr. Collins.
Lizzie, let the poor man alone.
Gladly, you shall have him all to yourself. If only Mr. Collins knew your good opinion of him, but he's too modest to find it out himself.
The two gentlemen from Netherfield have just brought their horses into the paddock, madam.
Show them in, Harris, and speak to Mrs. Bennet at once.
Yes, madam.
They've come soon, Lizzie. Truly, this is very civil of them.
Uncommonly civil. Come with me, Jane. I must make myself tidy. Mud and dirty petticoats for Mr. Darcy. Oh, no, 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 that would never do.
You will announce us to Mr. Bennet and the other ladies, Harris. Do you know Darcy? I believe that was George Wickham we just saw now going toward the Drake farm.
There's no doubt of it. It's his regiment's station at Meryton.
No, confound it. If I'd had any notion of that...
I don't think we need mind Wickham.
I do mind. To think that I should bring you into the neighborhood of that rascal.
He must live somewhere, I suppose.
Darcy, you're a puzzle to me. How can you speak with any charity of Wickham? For years he abused your father's patience and generosity, and when he has attempted lately against your family is the most dastardly.
We've already said too much of George Wickham. I prefer not to discuss him further. Bingley, I understand your indignation, but I dare not trust myself to think of the man's villainy. It's better that I say nothing of him even to you.
I'm sure. I beg your pardon, Darcy. Pretty place, this.
Very small.
We're in luck to have such a charming neighbors. Two of the young ladies were going through the lane the other day. Why, Darcy, one of them is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. And the other, the one with the dark eyes, she is uncommonly pretty. Didn't you think so?
She is tolerable, but fine eyes cannot change family connections.
What do you mean?
Their uncle's an attorney in Meryton.
Yes.
And they have another in London, somewhere near Cheapside.
If they had uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, it wouldn't make them one jot less handsome.
But it must materially lessen their chances of marrying men of any consideration in the world.
Marrying? You go fast, Darcy.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm so sorry that Mr. Bennet has gone for his walk.
Good morning, Mrs. Bennet. I am Mr. Bingley, your new neighbor at Netherfield. This is my friend, Mr. Darcy of Pemberley, Derbyshire. Mr. Bennet has been so kind to call upon us, and we are most happy to have the honor of waiting upon the ladies of this family.
We are delighted to see you, I'm sure. Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy, my eldest daughter, Miss Jane Bennet, and Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Will you be seated, gentlemen? Mr. Bingley, I do not know a place in the country that is equal to Netherfield. You won't think of quitting it in a hurry, I hope, though you have but a short lease.
Whatever I do is done in a hurry, Mrs. Bennet. If I should resolve to quit Netherfield, I should probably be off in 5 minutes. At present, however, I consider myself as quite fixed here.
It's very pleasant to have Netherfield open once more, although you must both miss the gaieties of London.
Yes, in a country neighborhood, you move in a confined and unvarying society.
But people themselves alter so much that there is something new to be observed in them forever.
Then you are a student of character, Miss Elizabeth. It must be an amusing study.
Yes, Lizzie always likes to watch people. And there are plenty of people about, even if you do live in the country. The country is a vast deal pleasanter than London, is it not, Mr. Bingley?
The country and the town each have their advantages. I am equally happy in either.
That is because you have the right disposition. But Mr. Darcy seems to think the country is nothing at all.
Mamma, you quite mistake Mr. Darcy. He only means that there is not such a variety of people in the country as in town, which you must acknowledge to be true.
Certainly, my dear, nobody said there was. But as to not meeting with many people here, I believe there are few neighborhoods larger. I know we dine with 24 families.
Yes, there are many fine estates hereabout. Can you see Sir William Lucas's place from the garden? I'm not quite sure I have placed it.
Sir William is our nearest neighbor. Such an agreeable man, so genteel and so easy. Come, Jane, we must show Mr. Bingley Sir William's chimneys. We have a fine view of his chimneys from the terrace.
Would you also like to see the chimneys, Mr. Darcy?
Thank you. Like yourself, I prefer people to places.
Well, I can laugh at people better than places, and I dearly love a laugh.
That's rather a dangerous trait, Miss Bennet. The wisest and the best of men may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke.
Truly, but I hope I never ridicule what is wise or good. Whims and inconsistencies do divert me, and I laugh at them whenever I can. But these, I suppose, are precisely what you are without.
Perhaps that is not possible for anyone, but it has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses which expose a strong understanding to ridicule.
Does your list of weaknesses include such faults as vanity and pride?
Vanity is a weakness, but pride, where there is real superiority of the mind, pride will always be under good regulation.
Oh, well then, I'm perfectly convinced, Mr. Darcy, that you have no defect.
I make no such pretension, Miss Bennet. I have faults enough. My temper I dare not vouch for, and I do not forget the follies and vices of others against myself. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever.
That is a failing indeed. Implacable resentment is a shading character, but you've chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me.
There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect which not even the best education can overcome.
And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody.
And yours to willfully misunderstand them.
The surrounding country is really charming, Mrs. Bennet.
We think so. You must give a ball at Netherfield, Mr. Bingley. Then you will see that some of the people who live here are worth knowing.
I'd already decided upon it, Miss Bennet. I told Darcy yesterday that as soon as my sister arrived, I should send out my cards. Did I not, Darcy?
I believe you did.
Well, that is vastly good of you, Mr. Bingley. Then perhaps your friend may change his mind about the country. You didn't come to admire Sir William's chimneys, Mr. Darcy.
I was admiring your daughter's efforts, madam.
Lizzie is all for books, like her father. She's a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else. You should see Jane's work. Jane, show your embroidered parrot to Mr. Bingley.
I do not think Mr. Bingley would be interested, Mamma.
Oh, indeed, Miss Bennet. I'm very much interested in parrots. Pray show it to me.
Yes, and the new hand screen. I will find it for you.
You are a great reader and take no pleasure in anything else?
Mamma doesn't understand. I deserve neither such praise nor such censure. I am not a great reader, and I have pleasure in many things.
So I should have thought.
It is amazing to me how young ladies can have patience to be so very accomplished as they are. To think how you all paint tables and cover screens and net purses. It is quite wonderful.
Do you agree with your friend, Mr. Darcy?
His is a list of the common extent of accomplishments. I consider perhaps no more than half a dozen young ladies in the whole range of my acquaintances to be really accomplished.
You must comprehend a great deal in your idea of an accomplished woman.
To deserve a world, a woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and modern languages. She must also possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, tone of her voice, her address and expression. To all this, she must yet add something more substantial, the improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
I am surprised that you know any accomplished women. It is miraculous you know as many as 6.
Colonel Forster and Mr. Wickham.
Oh, yes, here I am again, Mrs. Bennet. I found that Colonel Forster had a message for the young ladies.
I am delighted to see you. You are just in time to meet our new neighbors. Colonel Forster, Mr. Wickham, Mr. Bingley, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy, are you well?
Indeed, madam. Excuse me.
Well, if ever there was a proud, obstinate man.
Mamma.
Oh, Miss Bennet, I'm sorry that we cannot wait for Mr. Bennet. We were on the way to meet my steward, and we are already late for the appointment.
Oh, I'm so sorry you must go, Mr. Bingley. But we must engage you soon for dinner. I hope you will come again.
It will be a pleasure.
Your best way to the paddock is by the terrace.
My dear Miss Elizabeth, I have this moment found out that there is in this room a near relation of my patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Will you present me?
Mr. Bingley, allow me to present my cousin, Mr. Collins. Mr. Darcy, Mr. Collins.
Oh, my dear sir, I trust you will pardon me for not having paid my respects before. My complete ignorance of your presence here must plead my apology. Is there any message, sir, which I could take from you to my honored patroness, your aunt, or to your fair cousin, Miss de Bourgh?
Thank you, I will not trouble you.
It would not be trouble, but an honor and a privilege.
We're already very late. Thank you, Miss Bennet.
May I speak to you, madam?
Yes, Hill. Excuse me for a moment, gentlemen. I will return directly.
Miss Jane, Miss Elizabeth, your aunt, Miss Phillips, has sent word by me that her card party is to be held on Wednesday. She hopes you will be there.
Oh yes, we shall go.
Ah, the piano. And here's a song you've long promised to play for me, Miss Elizabeth.
Apologies, Colonel Forster. You must excuse me. Jane will play for you instead.
I cannot, Lizzie.
Please, Jane.
Oh, do, I beg you, Miss Jane.
How long has Mr. Darcy been in Hertfordshire, Miss Elizabeth?
Only for a short time. He comes from Derbyshire and has a very large property there.
Yes, his estate is a noble one. Clear 10,000 per annum. I have been connected with Mr. Darcy's family in a particular manner since my infancy.
Indeed.
You may well be surprised at this assertion after seeing the very cold manner of our meeting just now. Are you much acquainted with Mr. Darcy?
No, I've heard of him, but met him for the first time today. Even so, I take him to be ill-tempered. Is there something you wish to say regarding Mr. Darcy? I shall respect your confidence, Mr. Wickham.
Mr. Darcy and I were born in the same parish. My own father was steward of the Darcy estates. He gave up everything to serve the interests of the Darcy family. Mr. Darcy's father was excessively attached to me. Indeed, I was his godson. He meant to provide for me amply and thought he had done so.
How so?
I was destined for the church, and Mr. Darcy's father left to me a most valuable living. But the present Mr. Darcy chose to ignore his father's will and gave that living to another man. This closed to me the career for which I was most fitted and left me with almost no means of support.
Surely you sought legal redress.
An informality in the terms of the will left me no hope from the law. Mr. Darcy's father had relied implicitly upon the honor of his son.
But Mr. Darcy deserves to be publicly disgraced.
He will be, by someone, but not by me. Till I can forget his father, I can never defy or expose him.
This feeling does you honor. But what induced Mr. Darcy to behave so cruelly?
I attribute it in some measure to his jealousy. His father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him, but the fact is, Miss Elizabeth, we are very different men, and he hates me.
His disposition must be dreadful.
I will not trust myself on that subject.
To treat in such a manner the godson, the friend, the favorite of his father, how abominable.
And yet, we must try to be just to him. Mr. Darcy can be liberal and generous. He has also a brother's affection and pride, which makes him a careful guardian of his sister.
He has a sister?
To her, he is the most attentive and best of brothers. He can please when he chooses. Among those who are his equals, he is a very different man from what he is to the less prosperous.
Contemptible.
Wickham?
Yes, Colonel Forster.
I fear we must be going.
Thank you for listening to me. It is hard to be misjudged.
Thank you for your confidence. It is well to know the truth.
Miss Elizabeth, I hope we shall see you at your aunt's on Wednesday. Good morning. Good morning, Miss Jane. Thank you for the music. Please present my respects to Miss Bennet. I'm sorry that we cannot linger.
Yes, Miss Bennet, be sure to give your mother my best regards. Good morning.
Oh, have they gone?
Ah, Mrs. Bennet, I am just returned from attending on Mr. Darcy. Such a privilege. I was able to tell him that Lady Catherine was very well on Saturday week. I am sure you must have been impressed by his distinguished manners.
Well, really, Mr. Collins.
This meeting is most opportune. Will you kindly step this way for a moment? May I hope, madam, for your interest with your fair daughter Jane in the matter on which we were speaking yesterday, I would solicit the honor of a private audience with her.
Certainly, Mr. Collins. But some things have happened. It is right you should know that Jane is very likely to be soon engaged. But there is Elizabeth. Now, while I cannot take it upon myself to say, I cannot possibly answer. I'm sure she can have no objection to listen to you.
Then, Miss Elizabeth, let it be, madam. I was struck by her attitude of respectful awe when I mentioned Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Such modesty and humility of mind cannot but recommend her to my patroness.
Yes, Elizabeth knows what is proper. She will be very happy to listen to you. Shall I call her now?
I think, madam, there should be no further loss of time, as my leave of absence extends only to this coming Saturday.
Very well. Jane, I want you upstairs. Lizzie, Mr. Collins has something he wishes to say to you.
Dear Mamma, Mr. Collins must excuse me. I was just going away myself.
No nonsense, Lizzie. I desire you will stay. Mr. Collins has something very particular to say to you.
Mamma.
Lizzie, I insist upon your staying and hearing Mr. Collins. Come, Jane.
My dear Miss Elizabeth, allow me to assure you that I have your respected mother's permission for this address. My fair cousin, you must have at least surmised that I am about to ask you to become the companion of my life. Perhaps I might begin by stating my reasons for this decision before I am to run away with my feelings on the subject.
Oh no. Oh, I beg you, Mr. Collins.
My reasons for marrying in this instance are tripartite. First, I think it a right thing for every clergyman to set the example of matrimony to his parish. Second, I am convinced it will add very greatly to my happiness. And third, it is the particular advice of that very noble lady whom I have the honor of calling patroness.
Believe me, Mr. Collins.
It remains only to be told why my views were directed to Longbourn instead of to my own neighborhood. I am to inherit this estate after the death of your father. Bless him, he may live many years yet. However, to soften the loss for all of you when that melancholy event takes place, I am resolved to choose a wife from among his daughters, thus satisfying both the entail and my propriety. My fair cousin, I flatter myself that this motive will not sink me in your esteem.
Mr. Collins,
Nothing now remains for me to assure you of the violence of my affection. To fortune I am perfectly indifferent, and you may be assured that no ungenerous reproach on that score shall ever pass my lips when we are married.
You are too hasty, sir. Please accept my thanks for your compliment you pay me. While I am very sensible of the honor of your proposals, I must decline them.
I am not unmindful that a lady's refusal may be repeated a second or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and I shall hope to lead you to the altar ere long.
Sir, your hope is astonishing. You must pay me the compliment of believing what I say. I wish you happiness and prosperity. By refusing your hand, I do all in my power to prevent your being otherwise.
When I do myself the honor of speaking to you next on the subject, I shall hope to receive a more favorable answer.
Mr. Collins, you puzzle me. I clearly failed to express myself so that you understood. My refusal is precisely and only that.
I must flatter myself, my dear cousin, that your refusals are merely words. I shall choose to attribute them to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, per the usual practice of elegant females.
I am not an elegant female. Please pay me the compliment instead of being believed sincere. I can be no more direct. To accept your proposal is impossible.
You are uniformly charming, but I am persuaded that when my proposals are sanctioned by both your parents, they will be accepted.
Perhaps, sir. I do not, after all, lack for felicity of expression. You may suffer from discretionary deafness.
Meanwhile, I may best serve my cause by leaving you to consider the matter for a while.
I hope for the future of your progeny, the condition is not congenital.
Well, Mr. Collins, are we to congratulate each other? Has all gone as you could wish?
I have every reason to be satisfied, madam. My cousin has indeed steadily refused my first offer, and with considerable warmth. But this refusal would naturally flow from her bashful modesty. With your influence behind me, I have no doubt of my ultimate success.
You may depend upon me, Mr. Collins. Lizzie is a very headstrong, foolish girl, and does not know her own interest. But I will make her know it.
Pardon me, madam, but if she is really headstrong and foolish, I know not whether she would be a very desirable wife for a man in my situation. If Miss Elizabeth persists in rejecting my suit, perhaps it were better not to force her into accepting me.
Sir, you quite misunderstood me. Lizzie is only headstrong in such matters as these. In everything else, she's as good-natured a girl as ever lived. Let me see her alone for a moment. That will be best.
But, madam.
Oh, I shall very soon settle it with her, I'm sure. Lizzie, have you refused Mr. Collins?
No. Yes, of course I did. You know I did. You know I would. But, Mama, Please listen.
Elizabeth Bennet, if you take it into your head to refuse every offer of marriage, you will never get a husband at all. I'm going at once to the library to speak to your father.
Papa does not need to be drawn into this.
Ah, Mr. Bennet, we are in an uproar. You must make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins.
I don't understand. What are we talking about?
Lizzie vows she will not have Mr. Collins. If you do not make haste, Mr. Collins will change his mind and not have Lizzie.
Lizzie? I thought it was Jane.
No, it's Lizzie now.
Ah, well, that seems hopeless. And what's expected of me?
Speak to Lizzie. Tell her you insist upon her marrying Mr. Collins.
Come here, Lizzie. Please, this is important. I understand that Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage. Is this true?
Yes.
Very well. And you have refused?
I have, sir.
Now, to the point. Your mother insists upon your accepting him. Is it not so, Mrs. Bennet?
Yes, or I will never see her again.
Oh, I see.
An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. From this day, you must be a stranger to one of your parents.
Papa?
Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do.
Act 1, Scene 2, the conservatory at Netherfield. On stage right, an archway, approached by 2 or 3 steps and hung with curtains, separates the conservatory from a ballroom beyond. On stage left, a smaller archway with curtains, which are looped back, gives a glimpse of the drawing room beyond. Bingley is guiding the footman, Martin, through a second door on stage right, as Martin puts a bench in place. Darcy observes.
A little more to the right, Martin. That will do. Yes, that is better. You may go. Well, Darcy, do you approve of the arrangements? Anything to suggest? Any criticisms?
I have no criticisms for the arrangements.
But you have for the ball, yes? I know. Still, I was obliged to keep my promise.
I'm glad to find that a promise is an obligation with you.
Oh, come, Darcy. Set your mind at rest. I'm going to London with you, although I must say I don't see the necessity for it. I think you're exaggerating the effect of any small attentions of mine toward Miss Bennet. However, we'll stay together and fly a common danger.
Common danger?
Common danger. I have eyes. Where will you match Miss Elizabeth's wit and vivacity?
I admit I could be in some danger. She is charming. But for me, the inferiority of her connections forms an insurmountable barrier against any peril.
Love laughs at barriers, Darcy. It really isn't fair, though, since it is my fault. You'd never have been put to this test if you hadn't been so good as to stay on here with me after that. Darcy, do you really think you should be silent about Wickham?
I do not choose to lay my private affairs before the world.
Wickham is sailing under false colors. I'm concerned at the foothold this rascal has gained in the Bennet family. These young ladies have no brother to defend them.
Neither have they the wealth to excite Wickham's cupidity. At any rate, I don't wish to be the one to enlighten the neighborhood. Besides, I understand that he has left Meryton.
Even so,
here you are.
Miss Bingley?
I'm afraid this bracelet is winning our battle, Mr. Darcy. Will you be so kind? Your sister Georgiana should be here, Mr. Darcy. Charles, you should have insisted upon her coming.
Caroline, I'm not in the habit of insisting with Darcy.
Very true. Thank you, Mr. Darcy. This is pretty, Charles, but unless I am mistaken, there are some among us for whom a ball will be rather a punishment than a pleasure.
Darcy may go to bed, if he pleases, before it begins.
It would certainly be more rational if conversation instead of dancing were the order of the day.
Much more rational, my dear Caroline, but it would not be near so much like a ball.
Several of the carriages have arrived, sir, and the guests will soon be entering the ballroom.
Very well, Martin. Come, Caroline, we must be at our post. We'll leave Darcy to make up his mind whether he'll join us later.
Isn't this pretty? Come in for a moment, Eliza. I want to tell you something.
Oh, Charlotte, why did I promise to dance with Mr. Darcy just now? Why did I not have more presence of mind?
I dare say you will find him very agreeable.
Heaven forbid. That would be the greatest misfortune of all, to find a man agreeable whom one is determined to hate. Do not wish me such evil.
Don't be a simpleton, Eliza, nor angry because Wickham isn't here. But don't allow your fancy for him to make you unpleasant in the eyes of a man of 10 times his consequences.
My fancy for Wickham is merely sympathy for a most ill-used man. Also, the relief of meeting with good manners and a good understanding after Mr. Darcy's insufferable pride and the stupid pomposity of that dreadful Mr. Collins. Papa understood what sort of hideous match we'd make. In spite of his cousin being the remainder man, he refused to allow Collins to pursue me.
Don't, Eliza.
Charlotte, I've never thanked you half enough for helping us to endure that man. You sacrificed yourself on the altar of his interminable speeches. I'm more obliged to you than I can express. What a relief he is gone.
Eliza, you are making it terribly hard for me. But I am engaged to Mr. Collins.
Engaged? Engaged to Mr. Collins? Oh, my dear Charlotte, impossible. You're joking.
Eliza, I am in most serious earnest. Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion because he did not succeed with you?
Oh, no, of course not. And please, you must forgive all that I just said. I couldn't possibly have imagined.
No, Eliza. Indeed, you could not. And we shall be friends still.
Oh, dear Charlotte, yes, please, of course. It was only the surprise. You know how fond I am of you. You know I wish you all imaginable happiness.
You must be very much surprised. So recently did Mr. Collins express his wish to marry you. But dear Eliza, when you've had the time to think it all over, I hope you'll be satisfied with what I've done. I'm not romantic. I ask only a comfortable home. Considering Mr. Collins' situation in life, I believe my chances of happiness with him to be as far as most people who marry.
Undoubtedly.
And you will come to visit me sometimes. I could not bear to lose you, Eliza.
Surely, Charlotte. We are to be cousins, you know.
So we are.
I am to have the honor of this reel, I believe, Miss Lucas.
Oh yes, Colonel Foster.
We are being treated abominably, Lizzie. Mr. Wickham has gone off on business somewhere, so he will not be here at all.
I don't imagine his business would have called him away just now if he hadn't wished to avoid a certain gentleman.
Mr. Denny, I do believe the reel is half over. I dearly love a reel. We shall miss it altogether. Come.
Do you not feel a great inclination, Miss Bennet, to see such an opportunity of dancing a reel?
The world is surely upside down. Lydia and Mr. Denny, Charlotte and Collins. What a match.
Do you enjoy the reel, Miss Bennet?
Oh, I heard you before. I could not immediately determine how to reply. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste. I always delight in overthrowing that kind of scheme. I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance the reel at all. Now, despise me if you dare.
I do not dare.
May I have the honor, Miss Elizabeth?
I do not dance the reel, Colonel Foster.
Oh, the reel has just ended. This is our dance.
Very well, sir.
I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not, Miss Carolyn.
You're contemplating how insufferable it would be to pass many evenings in such society. I'm quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. Noisy, insipid. The nothingness and yet the self-importance of all these people.
You're wrong. My mind was more agreeably engaged. I was meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
Indeed. And will you not tell me what lady has inspired such reflections?
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet. How long has she been a favorite? Pray, when am I to wish you joy?
A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a moment. I knew you'd be wishing me joy.
If you're so serious about it, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother-in-law, and of course, she will always be at Pemberley with you. Perhaps you might give her a few hints of holding her tongue.
Thank you. Have you anything else to propose for my domestic felicity?
Oh, yes. Let the portrait of your uncle, the attorney, be placed next to your great uncle, the judge. They're in the same profession, you know, only different lines. As for your Elizabeth's portrait, well, what painter could do justice for those beautiful eyes?
Their color and shape, and the eyelashes so remarkably fine, might be caught. It would not be so easy to catch their expression.
Here comes the fair one, and mama-in-law will not intrude on the family party.
I thought this next dance was the one you liked so much, Darcy. Let me find you a partner.
So it is. But, thank you, Charles. I have a partner. Miss Elizabeth.
You must be tired, Miss Jane. I propose that we sit quietly through this dance. Do you agree?
Indeed, that would be very pleasant. How very prettily you've arranged all the rooms.
I'm so glad you think so. I feared they were rather inconvenient for so large a party.
Oh, I find them delightful.
You are always charitable, Miss Bennet. You always manage to see the best side of everything. I never knew you to say an ill word about a person or a place.
I only try to see things in their best light, perhaps.
The rest of us rarely try to see things that way. So I have proved my case. You are too amiable.
Not for tonight, Mr. Bingley. Everybody is of one mind tonight. You are giving nothing but pleasure.
I wish it were so, but... Dear Miss Bennet, I wish to tell you, I must tell you.
It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the rooms or number of couples.
I assure you that I will say whatever you wish.
That reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones.
Do you talk by rule, then?
Sometimes. One must speak a little, you know. And yet for the advantage of some, conversation ought to be arranged that they may have the trouble of saying as little as possible.
Are you consulting your own feelings, or do you imagine you are gratifying mine?
Both. I've always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We're each of a taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak, unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity with all the brilliance of a proverb.
This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I am sure. How near it may be mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it is a faithful portrait, undoubtedly.
I shall not critique my own performance. I'm surprised to not see Mr. Wickham here. He's a great favorite with the officers. He has many friends among them.
George Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure his making friends. Whether he is equally capable of returning them is less certain.
He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship, and the manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life.
What a charming amusement for young people this dancing is, Mr. Darcy. I consider it as one of the finest refinements of Polish societies.
Certainly, Miss Sir William. It also has the advantage of being in vogue amongst the less polished societies of the world. Every savage can dance.
Do you often dance at St. James?
Never, sir.
You have a house in town, I conclude. I had thoughts of fixing in town myself, but did not feel quite certain that the air of London would agree with Lady Lucas. I only wish to tell you how gratified I have been by your superior dancing. Allow me also to say that your fair partner does not disgrace you. It is a great pleasure to see you together, but I must not further interrupt you, sir. You will not thank me for detaining you from the bewitching converse of that young lady, whose bright eyes are upbraiding me. Excuse me.
Sir William's interruption made me forget what we were talking about.
Sir William could not have interrupted any two people who had less to say for themselves. We tried 2 or 3 subjects already without success. What are we to talk of next? I can't imagine. Books? Oh no. I'm sure we never read the same, or not with the same feelings.
Even if that be the case, we may at least compare our different opinions of them.
I cannot talk of books at a ball. My head is always full of something else.
The present always occupies you in such scenes, does it?
Always. Mr. Darcy, you hardly ever forgive. Once created, your resentment is unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to that resentment being created.
I am.
And you never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice.
I hope not.
It's particularly incumbent on those who never change their opinions to be certain they judge properly.
May I ask to what these questions lead?
To the illustration of your character. I'm trying to make it out. I hear such different accounts of you that I'm exceedingly puzzled.
I can believe the reports may vary greatly with respect to me. I could also wish, Miss Bennet, that you would not sketch my character at the present moment, as the results would likely reflect no credit on me.
If I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity.
I would by no means suspend your pleasure. How may we assist you, Miss Bingley?
Charles wishes to consult with you about some of the table arrangements. You'll find him in the dining parlor. That is, if Miss Bennet will permit you.
Certainly.
George Wickham must have told you all a pretty tale. Mr. Darcy did not use him ill. That is perfectly false. We resent these falsehoods and Mr. Wickham's presumptions. His coming into the country at all is most insolent, but really, considering his descent, we could not expect much better. He has evidently forgotten to tell you that he is the son of Old Wickham, steward to the late Mr. Darcy.
You accuse him of nothing worse than being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward. Of that, I can assure you, he informed me himself. By your account, his guilt and his descent are one and the same.
Mr. Darcy's interests are intimately associated with our own. We hope Miss Georgiana Darcy may someday be my sister. My brother Charles admires her greatly.
Insolent girl. You are mistaken if you expect to influence me by such a paltry attack. I see nothing in it but your own willful ignorance and the malice of Mr. Darcy.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Excuse my interference. It was kindly meant. One side. Martin, what are you doing with the furniture?
I beg your pardon, miss.
I thought it would be pleasant to have some of the tables here, Caroline. We must have places together, Jane.
Mamma, have you heard the news? Mr. Denny has just told me that the regiment is to leave Merrington and go to Brighton. Good heavens, what is to become of us, Mamma?
Are they really going, dear Lydia?
It's quite true, Mrs. Bennet.
Well, my love, it is too bad. I know how you feel. I'm sure I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away 25 years ago. I thought my heart might break.
I am sure I shall break mine. Mamma, might we not all go to Brighton?
Oh, if only we could. But I fear your father will not hear of it.
Papa is so disagreeable. A little sea bathing would set me up forever. Wouldn't it, Mr. Denny?
Surely, Miss Lydia. Oh, you must manage it in some way.
Come, Mr. Denny, we must make a plan.
Well, Lady Lucas, it is hard for a lively young girl like my Lydia to be cooped up in a place where so little goes on. However, we are not likely to have it so very dull in the future. You know what I mean. Jane and Bingley.
Indeed.
Oh, yes. It's quite settled. Such a charming young man. And Netherfield, only 3 miles from Longbourn. And Jane's marrying will be a fine thing for my other girls. They will surely meet other rich men who will fall in love with them.
Oh, Mama, be careful. Mr. Darcy can hear you.
What is Mr. Darcy to me, pray, that I should be afraid of him? I am sure we owe him no particular civility, as to be obliged to say nothing he may not like to hear.
For heaven's sake, madam, speak lower. What advantage can it be to you to offend Mr. Darcy? You'll never recommend yourself to Mr. Bingley that way.
That is enough, Lizzie. I never knew that it was a crime to speak to one's friends about what everybody can see plainly enough. Did you, Sir William?
Our friends usually have very sharp eyes for what is going on, Miss Bennet. I expected that you would observe what has been going on in your own household of late.
Going on? What has been going on, Sir William?
Lady Lucas and I have to ask your congratulations on our very great satisfaction in the recent engagement of our daughter, Charlotte.
Charlotte? Engaged? Why, who in the world is going to marry her?
The gentleman whom my daughter has honored is your husband's cousin, Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins? Marry your Charlotte? Good Lord, Sir William, how can you tell such a story? Mr. Collins is going to marry my Lizzie, or one of my other girls.
Well, really, Mrs. Bennet?
What I have told you is quite true, Mrs. Bennet. The whole matter was settled before Mr. Collins returned to Hunsford. I am sorry we are not to receive your good wishes.
Oh, but you are, Sir William. Charlotte has already told me about her engagement, and we shall be most happy to welcome her as a cousin.
Oh, well, thank you, Miss Elizabeth. I am sure other congratulations will be shortly in order.
Charlotte has told you, has she? Well, I don't believe a word of it.
Oh, Mamma.
I am sure Mr. Collins has been taken in. Well, I trust they will never be happy together, and I hope the match will be broken off.
Mamma!
And you are the cause of the whole mischief, Lizzie. I have been barbarously used.
Ladies and gentlemen, I should like to propose the health of Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley.
To Mr. Bingley, may the pleasure which he has given us tonight be but a foretaste of the future. Happiness which he will both receive and give in this community.
Mr. Bingley.
Forster.
And may I be allowed to farther express the sentiments of this community by proposing another toast? To the Master of Netherfield, may he retain that title from his present fortunate youth to his future green and honored old age.
Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I really cannot tell you how much I am touched by the very kind words of Colonel Forster and Sir William. And I only wish that I deserved them.
Of course
you deserve them.
No, I do not. I did not like to speak of such a painful thing on an occasion like this, and it is a very sudden decision, but important interests have made it necessary for me to leave Netherfield.
Leave Netherfield?
No.
But only for a time, Mr. Bingley. Let us hope this will only be a temporary separation.
Why, surely, Mr. Bingley, you will be back again very soon.
No. I am afraid my returning at all is extremely uncertain. In fact, I expect to leave Netherfield permanently.
My dear Mr. Bingley!
This is indeed a calamity.
Good Lord, Lizzie. Poor Jane. What is...
Hush, Mama.
But my friends, nobody knows what may happen. We shall all undoubtedly all meet again sometime, and meanwhile, you must not let what I have said spoil your pleasure. We must have another dance together. Let us make up a set here. I think there will be room.
Capital idea.
Oh, yes, capital. Do you not think so, Mr. Darcy?
Mrs. Bingley, may I have the pleasure?
Miss Jane, will you grant me the happiness, the final happiness of my stay at Netherfield?
Thank you.
May I have the honor, Miss Elizabeth?
Thank you, Mr. Darcy. I am indisposed.
Act 2, Scene 1, Mr. Collins' parsonage at Hunsford. Upstage is an open door that leads directly into the garden. Beyond the garden, through an opening in the trees of the park opposite, we see the prospect of Rosings, the residence of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, a handsome modern building on rising ground. A wide cottage window, also upstage, gives a plain view of the passers-by. On either side of the parlor, doors lead to other parts of the house. Elizabeth is standing upstage at the open door and is looking up at someone outside who is evidently climbing a trellis.
Are these the ones you wish, Miss Bennet?
No, Colonel Fitzgerald. Those are buds, the ones higher still, by the eaves. Thank you. They're lovely.
May not I have one as my reward, Miss Bennet? A single rose?
Is not accomplishment its own reward?
And is not the power to be generous the highest reward that can be given to any accomplishment?
Oh, surely. And so you would have to be generous and get me some more roses. Then we should both have to invent new speeches, and so we should never be done till we were ready to print a phrase book. However, you have certainly won your rose.
Thank you. That phrase book is a capital idea, Miss Bennet. Nothing could please me better than just such an occupation. Darcy is such a dull fellow these days that I really don't know what to do with myself.
But we should hardly have the time for such a project. You and Mr. Darcy are to leave Lady Catherine on Saturday.
Yes, if Darcy doesn't put it off again. He's already paid our aunt a much longer visit than ever before. I'm at his disposal, you know. He arranges the business just as he pleases.
No one seems more to enjoy the power of doing what he pleases than Mr. Darcy.
He does like very well to have his own way, but so do we all. I ought to go look for him. I expected to find him here, but he may expect me to meet him at the crossroads.
I imagine your cousin brought you with him chiefly to have somebody at his disposal. I wonder he doesn't marry to secure a lasting convenience of that kind. Perhaps his sister does as well for the present. As she is under his sole care, he may do what he likes with her.
That's an advantage he must share with me. I'm joined with him in Miss Georgiana's guardianship.
Young ladies of her age are sometimes difficult to manage, and if she has the true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way.
Why do you suppose Miss Darcy is likely to give us any uneasiness, Miss Bennet?
You need not be frightened. She is a great favorite with the lady of my acquaintance, Miss Caroline Bingley. I've heard you say that you knew Miss Bingley.
A little. Her brother's a pleasant, gentlemanlike man. He's a great friend of Darcy's.
Mr. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley and takes prodigious care of him.
Darcy really does take care of him. I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him.
What is it you mean?
Darcy could not wish this to be generally known. If it were to get around to the lady's family, it would be unpleasant.
You may depend upon me not mentioning it.
He congratulated himself on having saved a friend from the inconveniences of a most imprudent marriage, but without names or any other particulars. I have suspected Charles Bingley could be the kind of young man to get into a scrape of that sort.
Did Mr. Darcy give you his reasons for this interference?
I understood that there were some very strong objections against the lady.
And what arts did he use to separate them?
He only told me what I have now told you.
What right did Mr. Darcy have to decide, upon his judgment alone, to determine in what manner his friend was to be happy? But as we know none of the particulars, it isn't fair to condemn him. I suppose there was not much affection in the case.
Darcy told me that he did not think that the lady, at least, was very deeply concerned in the matter. However, to lessen the effects on either side is to lessen the honor of my cousin's triumph very sadly.
Your cousin's triumph?
Yes, Mr. Darcy. I saw Colonel Fitzgerald go up the garden path a few moments ago. Oh, no, Mr. Darcy, you're too kind, really.
Hey, Miss Charlotte, allow me.
Ah, good morning, Colonel. Pray, let me have the basket now, Mr. Darcy.
Good morning, Miss Bennet. Ah, Fitzgerald, I thought I might find you here.
Yes, I've been so fortunate as to secure some of Mrs. Collins' early roses for Miss Bennet.
Really? Have they already opened?
A very few, but Colonel Fitzgerald was obliged to fly very near to the sun to get me these.
And you see, Icarus has his reward.
Colonel Fitzgerald might not have won his rose so easily had others been in the field.
Ah, but I cannot lessen Colonel Fitzgerald's achievement by admitting any such possibility.
Thank you, Miss Bennet.
Well, surely my roses will have to bloom their prettiest this season in return for all the attention they have received. Will you not be seated, gentlemen?
Thanks, no, Mrs. Collins. I merely stopped for Colonel Fitzgerald, but perhaps his rose gathering has caused him to abandon our taking a walk together this morning.
By no means, Darcy. That pleasure has only been deferred.
Very good, then. We will go at once if Mrs. Collins and Miss Bennet will pardon my hasty call.
Certainly, Mr. Darcy. Martha, take these eggs to the pantry.
Very well, ma'am.
Now, Eliza, we must get to our work and have a comfortable chat. You've been here nearly 2 weeks, and we really haven't had a good talk yet.
You promised me a quiet visit, Charlotte, but more is happening here than at Longbourn.
But how could I have anticipated the arrival here of 2 very attentive young gentlemen? It's either a surprising coincidence or else Mr. Darcy has timed his visit to his aunt very cleverly. Neither of these young men would ever come so often to see me. I have to thank you, Eliza, for this civility.
You may thank their lack of occupation. You know my opinion of Mr. Darcy.
Yes, you have often expressed it. I wish I were as well informed of his opinion of you.
When you know one, you know the other. They are identical.
Perhaps that's best, under the circumstances. And so Jane is home after her visit in London, and Lydia has gone to Brighton after all. How did she ever persuade your father?
Lydia and Mamma gave my father no peace till he consented. But I am sorry. Lydia is foolish, too ignorant and willful to be trusted away from home. I only hope no harm will come of it.
And is Mr. Wickham still with his regiment?
Yes, he went with it to Brighton.
I hear that he's thinking of marrying Miss King, since she's just received a legacy of £10,000. I should be sorry to think that our friend was mercenary.
A man in distressed circumstances doesn't have time for all those proprieties which other people observe. If Miss King does not object, why should we?
Her not objecting does not justify him.
Well, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. Mr. Wickham's worst fault, after all, is his power of being agreeable. Thank heaven, both of us know some men who haven't one agreeable quality. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing.
Yes, well. And you say that Jane is not in her usual spirits?
Yes.
And she is looking poorly?
Yes, very.
Did she see much of Bingley, of the Bingleys in London?
She saw nothing of them. Charlotte, all my suspicions are verified.
Suspicions?
This has all been arranged. Mr. Bingley has been kept away from Jane by...
Don't imagine such nonsense, Eliza. A young man like Mr. Bingley easily falls in love with a pretty girl for a few weeks. When accident separates them, he easily forgets her. This sort of inconsistency is frequent.
We don't suffer from accident, Charlotte. A young man of independent fortune doesn't suddenly decide of his own free will to think of nothing more of a girl with whom he was violently in love.
But were they?
Yes. Mr. Bingley would talk to no one else, would look at no one else. Isn't general incivility the very essence of love?
It is usually a good test. But if Jane did not return his affections, it really did not seem to me that there was anything violent in Jane's attitude. I could never see that she showed any extreme affection for Bingley.
Jane was very much in love with him, and he showed her affection as much as her nature would allow. If Bingley didn't see it, he was a simpleton. Maybe the real trouble was that Jane didn't see him often enough to truly understand his character.
Oh, if Jane married Bingley tomorrow, she could be just as happy as if she'd studied him for a year. It is far better to know as little as possible of a person with whom you will pass your life.
In some cases, that is undoubtedly true.
Mr. Collins enters, carrying a large full basket and a garden spade.
Ah, a very charming domestic picture. My dearest wife, I have found some fine early radishes. I thought it would be a graceful attention on your part to send some to Mr. Berg.
I fear the apothecary might object.
Nothing Mr. Bernard has provided appears to have been beneficial, and some of his poultices, in fact, seem particularly noxious. The radishes may perhaps help to restore her vigor. Miss Elizabeth, I am very successful in my gardening. Lady Catherine is always ready to encourage me in it, and my dear Charlotte is ever willing that I should leave her side for the sake of this healthful exercise. It is indeed a pity that Mr. Berg is not well enough to enjoy these radishes.
Yes, Charlotte has told me that Mr. Berg is sickly.
My dear Charlotte has doubtless told you as well, Miss Elizabeth, of the alliance which is in prospect between Mr. Berg and Mr. Darcy. Her extreme delicacy of constitution would seem to be the only bar to their happiness.
I'm sure that Anne de Bourgh will make Mr. Darcy a very proper wife.
When you have seen Lady Catherine, you will be more deeply impressed, I am sure. We can hardly expect her to call upon you. Mr. Berg's illness would prevent it, and it would be an act of extreme condescension on her part.
Oh, of course.
But I am quite confident that you will receive an invitation to drink tea of a Sunday evening with her, after Mr. Darcy and his cousin are gone, of course. And we may later have an invitation to dinner, although I would not for the world arouse in you false hopes which may be shattered.
Oh, Mrs. Collins, Lady Catherine's carriage is turning into the lane, and she is in it.
Lady Catherine? At this hour? What an amazing condescension! Oh, but my dear Charlotte, I am quite unprepared. My habiliments. I would not be wanting in respect. Oh, what shall I do?
Yet, go make yourself ready, Mr. Collins. We will do the same.
Oh, yes, but this implement...
Martha, take the spade from Mr. Collins.
And the radishes?
And the basket, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Do not make yourself uneasy about your own apparel, Miss Elizabeth. Lady Catherine is far from acquiring that elegance in us which becomes herself and her daughter.
Do go, Mr. Collins. Lady Catherine will be here in an instant.
She pushes Mr. Collins out the door, right, and closes it behind him.
Are you going to change your dress, Charlotte? Do you wish me to do so?
Well, Eliza, if you wouldn't mind, I should like you to put on your sprigged muslin. In spite of what Mr. Collins says, I know it would please him. I have no time to change. Is my cap straight? Oh, here she is. Mr. Collins! Mr. Collins!
So at last, her high and only mightiness. No tremors, Elizabeth. Now is the time for all your courage.
You keep too many hens, Mrs. Collins. Mrs. Collins? Well?
I'm sorry, madam. They should return very quickly.
One can only hope. Tell them where I am.
Martha exits, tangling with the Collinses, who enter hurriedly.
Oh, forgive me, Lady Catherine. It is such a pleasant surprise to find you here.
I encountered an overly large number of hens as I approached. Only a certain number are profitable. Beyond that, there is waste. A clergyman's wife should set an example of thrift. You should have asked my advice.
Mrs. Collins will in the future regulate her poultry yard, Lady Catherine, if you will be so condescending as to give directions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Lady Catherine.
Will your ladyship not take some refreshment?
Oh, yes, sir. Let me fetch you a cup of tea.
No, I wish nothing. But Mr. Collins, see if Jones is walking the horses. I do not trust Jones.
With great pleasure, your ladyship.
I thought you had a visitor, Mrs. Collins.
Yes, your ladyship. My friend, Miss Elizabeth Bennet. She is a cousin of Mr. Collins and a neighbour of ours in Hertfordshire.
Fitzwilliam said she is a very genteel, pretty kind of girl.
Indeed, she is, Lady Catherine.
Well, where is she?
She has gone to make a little change in her dress before presenting herself to your ladyship.
Oh, very proper. Very proper.
I am delighted to hear that Mr. Berg is better, Lady Catherine.
Thank you. She is greatly improved. Well, Miss Bennet takes her time.
Oh, here she is, Lady Catherine, Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
How do you do, Miss Bennet? You are younger than I thought. You know my nephew, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy?
Yes, I met him in Hertfordshire.
And you know Colonel Fitzgerald?
I have only met Colonel Fitzgerald since coming here.
Has your governess left you?
My sisters and I have never had a governess, madam.
I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite the slave to your education.
I assure you, she was not Lady Catherine.
Then who taught you? Without a governess, you must have been neglected.
Those of us who never wanted the means.
If I had known your mother, I should have advised her most strenuously to engage a governess. I should have seen to it myself. Ah, I see I must have interrupted your embroidery. Go on with it, Mrs. Collins. A clergyman's wife should set an example of industry. And you, Miss Bennet, young ladies should never be idle. What is your age, Miss Bennet?
I am not yet 20.
You have sisters?
Yes, madam.
Are any of them out?
All, madam.
What? All out at once? Very odd. Out before the oldest is married.
Really, madam, it would be very hard on the younger sisters not to have their share of society, simply because the eldest is not married. That would hardly be likely to promote sisterly affection or delicacy of mind.
Upon my word, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Your sisters may be married before you. You must not be too ambitious. A good many young girls have lost their chances through being too ambitious. Mrs. Collins, I suppose you have shown Miss Bennet this print of Pemberley, Mr. Darcy's place?
Yes, Lady Catherine.
Pemberley is one of the finest places in England. My daughter Anne is very fond of it. That is fortunate, since she will probably spend the most of her life there.
Most fortunate, your ladyship.
You see my nephews here often, Miss Bennet?
Yes, very often, Lady Catherine.
Idle young gentlemen often make foolish use of their time. My daughter, Miss de Bourgh, is not able to accompany Mr. Darcy in his walks as often as both of them could desire.
I think your ladyship's mind may be quite at rest about the horses. Jones has them well in hand.
I'm glad you have come back, Mr. Collins. I am going to ask you and Mrs. Collins to go and see the new cottages with me. You had better put on a plain bonnet, Mrs. Collins.
By all means, your ladyship.
Are you quite ready to go, Mr. Collins?
Assuredly, your ladyship. Quite, yes.
Miss Bennet, I should advise you to write to your family while we are gone.
Well, we shall not be gone very long, Eliza.
We shall see, Mrs. Collins. However, I have provided an occupation for Miss Bennet during our absence. Good morning, Miss Bennet. I may ask you later for dinner.
Good morning, Mary. Well, Lady Catherine did give good advice. I really ought to write my poor dear Jane. Mr. Darcy, there's a year of my life scattered to the wind.
I'm sorry I startled you, Miss Bennet. I had to wait until my aunt was gone. I have something which I must say to you, Miss Bennet. I have struggled in vain. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Miss Bennet, I can well understand your astonishment at this declaration. I am amazed myself, but my feeling for you has possessed me against my will, my reason, almost in spite of myself.
What?
My admiration for you is only too natural. I share it with everyone who knows you, but, pardon me, it pains me to offend you.
Offend me?
Only the utmost force of my passion for you has allowed me to put aside the defects of your nearest relations, the complete lack of propriety so frequently betrayed by your family.
If I felt grateful, I would thank you. But I've never desired your good opinion, even though you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly.
But, my dear Miss Bennet, your own loveliness triumphs in contrast to its source. I now hope that the strength of my love may have its reward in your acceptance of my hand.
Mr. Darcy, I'm obliged for the sentiments you vow. You are entitled to know that I cannot return them equally.
And that is all the reply which I have the honor to respect. I might perhaps be informed why, with so little endeavor at civility, I am rejected.
I might inquire why you chose to say you liked me, despite your best judgment. Since you evidently designed to insult me, how civil a reply could you have expected?
I very clearly explained that my hesitance and objections concerned your family, not you.
I'm part of my family, Mr. Darcy. And since I've had the opportunity to compare my relations with yours, the contrast isn't so marked as I supposed. And how could you believe I would be remotely tempted to accept the man who has helped to leave my beloved sister in acute misery?
What?
Do you deny you have done this?
I did everything in my power to separate Charles from your sister. I didn't anticipate that I should leave either of them in misery. On Jane's side, I never discovered any symptoms of peculiar regard for Mr. Bingley. And I rejoice in my success with my friend. I have been kinder toward him than toward myself.
How calmly you decipher the extent of other people's sentiments. Your arrogance no longer surprises me. Long before you interfered in my sister's concerns, my opinion of you was decided. Your character unfolded during Mr. Wickham's recital months ago.
You take an eager interest in that gentleman.
Who wouldn't, understanding his misfortunes?
His misfortunes. Yes, his misfortunes have been great indeed.
You inflicted them upon him. You reduced him to his present state. You withheld advantages you knew were designed for him. You did all this and treat the mere mention of his misfortunes with contempt and ridicule.
This is the estimation in which you hold me. Perhaps if I divulged the truth regarding Mr. Wickham, I might surprise you as you have me. The man you consider a martyr is a profligate with the most vicious propensities, a man who should never have entered your home. His presence there is a constant source of danger.
Mr. Wickham, a danger?
I can prove what I say, Miss Bennet, whenever you desire, although no other circumstances beyond the present should induce me to unfold them to any human being.
Your judgment of my sister gives me a gauge by which I can measure your fairness to someone who has been so unfortunate to offend you. My faith in Mr. Wickham is unshaken.
Your bitterness might have been suppressed had I concealed my struggles. I erred in the manner of my declaration. I wounded your pride. I should have flattered you that I was impelled by my inclination, by reason, by reflection, by everything. But I abhor disguise of every sort. Did you expect I rejoice in the inferiority of your connections?
And did you expect me to rejoice in allying myself to the conceit and impertinence of yours? The manner of your declaration has spared me the concern which I might have felt in refusing you, had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike way. You couldn't have made me the offer of your hand in any way that would have tempted me to accept it. I hadn't known you a month before I felt you were the last man in the world whom I could ever marry.
Forgive me. I've taken up your time. Please accept my best wishes for your health and happiness. Good day, Miss Bennet.
To insult my family. To think I was ready to fall on my knees in gratitude for his condescension. To calmly dispose of Jane's happiness. And yet really to be in love with me in spite of every obstacle. Oh, Jane. Jane, I wish you were here.
Excuse me, miss. The express has just brought a letter.
A letter for me?
Yes, miss.
Why, it's from Jane. What can be the matter?
Dear Lizzie, I have bad news for you that cannot be delayed. An express came to us last night from Colonel Forster. He told us that Lydia had run away to Brighton with one of his officers, with Wickham. He thought they had gone to Scotland, but it is far worse than that. Wickham never intended to go there or to marry Lydia at all. Colonel Forster has been here today. He says Wickham has left Brighton terribly in debt, and his record is bad in every way. Papa's going to London with Colonel Forster instantly to try to discover the fugitives. It is hard to ask you to shorten your visit, but...
Where is the express? I must write. No, I must go. Oh, Lydia and Wickham. I must go at once. I must send someone for a carriage. Martha, the express.
Miss Bennet?
Colonel Fitzgerald, is that you?
What is the matter, Miss Bennet?
Oh, Colonel Fitzgerald, the express. Or can you get me a carriage? I have bad news from home. I must return at once, and Mr. Collins is away. Will you be so kind?
Certainly, my dear Miss Bennet. Of course, but... Darcy, don't wait for me. I can't join you now. Miss Bennet is in distress.
Miss Bennet? Good Lord, what is the matter?
Miss Bennet has just had bad news from home. She wishes to return and desires a carriage.
Fitzgerald, get a carriage from the stables. Go. I'll remain with Miss Bennet. Shall I get the maid, Miss Bennet?
No, thank you. I'm quite well. Only distressed by some dreadful news which I've just received from Longbourn.
Miss Elizabeth.
I've just had a letter from Jane, with such dreadful news. It cannot be concealed from anyone.
I am grieved, Miss Bennet. Grieved indeed.
Mr. Darcy, you were right, but I could not believe it.
My dear Miss Bennet, what has happened?
I cannot tell it, and yet everyone must know. My sister Lydia has eloped, has thrown herself into the power of George Wickham. She has no money, nothing that can tempt him to. She's lost forever.
Good God, Miss Bennet. Your sister in Wickham? This is my fault. I should have realized this danger and spoken. My own wretched experience with this man should have been told.
Your experience?
Yes. You remember, I hinted it to you today, but I should long ago have spoken boldly.
What do you mean?
Mr. Wickham attempted this same plan with my own sister Georgiana 2 years ago. She was an innocent, trusting girl of 15. His villainy was discovered and prevented. I should have told you. Had his character been known, this could not have happened.
You tried to tell me, Mr. Darcy. Everybody has tried to warn me. But I could not believe it, and now it's too late. Too late.
Let us hope not. Is what you have told me certain? Absolutely certain?
Oh, yes. They left Brighton together on Sunday night. They are certainly not going to Scotland.
And what has been attempted to recover your sister?
My father has gone to London to beg my Uncle Gardiner's assistance. But how is such a man to be worked on? How are they ever to be discovered? I haven't the smallest hope.
Elizabeth, I've made a wretched mistake in all this. Would that I could make you reparation or offer consolation to such distress? Mr. and Mr. Collins are returning. What would you wish me to do?
I do not know.
You really wish to return home at once?
Yes, at once. Take me home, Mr. Darcy.
Act 2, Scene 2. The Gardens at Longbourn. Mrs. Bennet is seated in a garden chair with pillows. She has an umbrella over her head. She wears a big cap and is gowned in a widely flowing, flowered chamber robe, over which is fastened a shawl. Across her knees is a lap robe.
Dear Mamma, do try and take some food. You'll be ill if you don't eat something.
Yes, do, I beg you, madam. Now that you are in the air again, if you will only take some food, you will feel much better.
How can I feel better? I must be ill. If I could have gone to Brighton with all of my family, this would never have happened. Poor dear Lydia had no one to take care of her. Oh, that villainous Wickham. I am sure there was some great neglect or other somewhere, for Lydia is not the kind of girl to run away with a man. But no one would listen to me. I was overruled, as I always am.
Mamma, try to be calm.
Yes, madam, this excitement is so bad for you.
How can I help being excited? Mr. Bennet has gone, and I know he will fight that abominable Wickham and be killed. The Collinses will turn us out before Mr. Bennet is cold in his grave. If my brother Gardiner is not kind to me, I do not know what we shall do.
Oh, Mamma, please try not to speak of such terrible things.
No, indeed, madam. You must not, indeed.
Oh, I do think that Wickham is the wickedest young man in the world to so deceive my innocent Lydia. But perhaps my brother may be able to see if they are married. Write to him at once, Jane. Tell him to find them wherever they are. If they are not married already, make them marry. But Jane, tell him that Lydia need not wait for wedding clothes. She doesn't even know which are the best warehouses. And Jane, tell your Uncle Gardiner to keep your father from fighting that hateful Wickham. Tell him about the dreadful state.
Yes, Mamma.
Where are you going?
Why, to write the letter, Mamma.
Well, not now. Don't leave me alone. Where's Lizzie?
She has gone down the road to meet the post. She hopes to bring you good news.
She had better stay here and be of some help. She's only just got home and now she leaves me. Nobody thinks of me or what I suffer. I'm frightened out of my wits. I can get no rest by night or by day. You might try and do something, Hill. Where is my soothing draught?
Well, here, madam. Oh, no, I must have left it in your room. I will run and fetch it.
Mama, Lizzie's running up the drive. She is smiling. She has some good news, I am sure.
Take care, Jane. You're agitating me. Oh, my poor nerves.
Oh, good news. Good news, Jane. Mama, they are married.
Lizzie, don't excite me. You are sure?
Dear Aunt Gardner has written me. They really are married. Oh, how good my uncle is.
Oh, Jane, Lizzie, my dear Lydia is really married. I shall see her again. Oh, my good, kind brother. But Lizzie, how did it happen?
Yes, tell us all about it. Let me read the letter.
No, I'll tell you. Papa and Uncle Gardner succeeded in finding Lydia. Aunt Gardner didn't tell me just how it was done.
And your father found that they were married after all. I told him that.
No, Mama, they weren't married, and they had no intention of being. But Papa and Uncle Gardner insisted upon it. They took Lydia away to Aunt Gardner's house, and from there, they were married yesterday at St. Clement's Church.
St. Clement's? Oh, that's fine.
Uncle Gardner has arranged to have all Mr. Wickham's debts paid, and Papa is to settle an allowance for Lydia.
But what are they going to do now?
Papa's coming home at once. He may be here any moment. At first, he wouldn't consent to let Lydia and Wickham come here, but he knew how anxious Mama would be, so they are coming too.
At once?
Yes, today.
Oh, my dear Lydia. The wedding clothes. I must write to my sister Gardner about them directly.
Oh, Mama, there's plenty of time for that.
Oh, how merry we shall all be together. I am so happy. Lydia is Mrs. Wickham. How well it sounds. My dear Jane, I must see about the clothes. We will settle with your father about the money later. Oh, I'm such a flutter. My dear Hill, have you heard the news? Miss Lydia's married and is coming home directly.
Oh, indeed. Wonderful, madam.
You shall all have a bowl of punch to make merry for her wedding, and I am going into the house to write about the clothes. No, Jane, you stay here. I know what I am about. Come, Hill. Think of it. Lydia is Mrs. Wickham.
Oh, Lizzie, how relieved and happy we should be. It's wonderful. Are you sure it's true?
Yes, Jane. They're really married. And we are to be thankful. In spite of Lydia's folly and Wickham's wretched character, we are to rejoice. How strange it is.
May I read the letter, Lizzie?
Not now, dear. Later, perhaps. I'm very sorry now. I told Mr. Darcy about this wretched affair. It's come out well, and he never needed to know about it. I was mortified, and for what?
But how would you have explained things to Charlotte and Mr. Collins without his help? Mr. Darcy made everything so smooth and plausible for your sudden departure.
That's true.
Really, Lizzie, Mr. Darcy's kindness to you has won my heart, and his proposal was a most flattering compliment. Why can you see no good in him? You are always so full of excuses for Wickham, but his open and delightful manners deceived us all.
Yes. One has all the goodness, and the other has all the appearance of it.
I never thought Mr. Darcy so deficient in the appearance of it as you did. And he could hardly have had the friends he has if he did not possess some good qualities. Lizzie, have you heard that Mr. Bingley is back in Netherfield?
Oh, Jane, no. When did he come? Have you seen him?
No, I hardly expect to see him.
You will, if he's returned. Darling Jane, you're going to be very happy.
Lizzie, dear, don't. That's all over now, and I don't want to be happy unless you can be, too.
40 Mr. Bingleys wouldn't make me happy. Till I have your disposition, I never can have happiness. I'll shift for myself. Perhaps with good luck, I may meet with another Mr. Collins.
Mr. Bennet has returned, madam, and is looking for you.
Where is he, Harris? There he comes, Papa.
Papa, tell us all about it quickly, quickly. Are they really married?
They are, yes. That misfortune is well settled on them.
When will they be here?
I didn't care to travel with them, but they're not far off. I kicked up as much dust with my post-chase as I could, but they stayed just far enough behind me that they avoided the worst of it.
Ah, dear Papa, how you must have suffered.
Who should suffer but myself? It's been my own doing, and I ought to feel it.
You mustn't be too severe upon yourself.
Lizzie, let me once in my life feel how much I've been to blame.
But how did you persuade them to marry?
I didn't persuade them. I hadn't the means. It's all your uncle's doing. He managed to buy Wickham for us.
Oh, dear good uncle.
There are two things I want very much to know. How much money your uncle has laid down to bring it about, and how I am ever to repay him.
But Uncle Gardner did not do it all.
Aunt Gardner has written that you're to give Lydia an allowance.
Yes, 100 a year. Do you think that any man in his proper senses would marry Lydia on so slight a temptation as 100 a year?
Wickham's a fool if he takes Lydia with a farthing less than £10,000. I should be sorry to think him so stupid in the very beginning of our relationship.
Sorry, that's the wrong line. Let's just go back to that hadn't occurred to me before.
I was wondering why that didn't make any sense. I'm sorry.
No worries. You can go when you're ready.
That hadn't occurred to me before. It must be my uncle's doing. Generous man. I'm afraid he has distressed himself. A small sum could not do all this.
Wickham's a fool if he takes Lydia with a farthing less than £10,000. I should be sorry to think him so stupid in the very beginning of our relationship.
£10,000? How is half of such a sum to be repaid?
That is what I should like to know.
Well, my uncle's kindness can never be requited. If such goodness as his does not make Lydia miserable, then she will never deserve to be happy. Why, they have come. See, Papa, Jane. There are Lydia and Wickham.
I'll go to the library. I can receive their congratulations later. You know, despite it all, I am extremely fond of Wickham, Lizzie. I defy even Sir William Lucas to produce a more valuable son-in-law.
I must run and tell Mamma.
Well, Jane. Well, Lizzie, here we are.
My sister Jane. My sister Elizabeth.
Good gracious, here I am again. I'm sure I had no idea of being married when I went away, though I thought it would be very good fun if I was. Why don't you take the boxes in, Harris? Mr. Wickham, have you seen my pink-flowered bandbox? No, it isn't here. Oh, my dear George, do go fetch it. The box with the white satin hat you bought me. I wouldn't lose it for the world.
Certainly, my dear. You see, Jane and Lizzie, how eagerly I embrace my new opportunities?
Oh, girls, I am dying to give you an account of my wedding.
I think there cannot be too little said on that subject.
Jane wants to hear. I know, and anyway, I want to tell you. There was such a fuss. Aunt Gardner preached away to me all the time I dressed, as if she was reading a sermon. I didn't hear one word in 10. And I was thinking of my dear George. I longed to know whether he would be married in his blue coat. Well, we got to church, and then Uncle Gardner gave me a fright because he was so late, and he was going to give me away. If he hadn't come, Mr. Darcy might have done.
Mr. Darcy?
Oh, yes, Darcy came along with Wickham. But gracious me, I quite forgot. What will Wickham say? It was to be such a secret.
Then say not another word on the subject, Lydia. We shall ask no questions.
Oh, thank you. For if you did, I should surely tell you. And then Wickham would be angry. Oh, there is Mamma.
Oh, my dear Lydia. And my dear Wickham.
Do all the people hereabouts know that I am married? I was afraid they might not. and so I let my hand just rest on the window frame outside the carriage so that everybody could see my wedding ring, and then I bowed and smiled like everything.
You may be sure, my dear, that everybody will rejoice with us in our good luck. Oh, your marriage is a great compensation to me after all my disappointment about Jane and Lizzie. Do not blame Jane, for she would have got Mr. Bingley if she could. But Lizzie, oh, Lydia is very hard to think she might now have been Mrs. Collins. But how about your clothes?
You may be sure I would not forget them.
But you didn't know the best warehouses. Well, never mind. We will see to that later. Now you must all come in and have dinner.
Ah, Jane, I take your place now. I go first because I am a married woman.
Will you not come into the house, madam?
No, I prefer to remain here. Tell Miss Elizabeth Bennet that a lady wishes to see her at once.
Yes, madam.
Insufferable impudence. Conceited little minx. She shall have a piece of my mind.
Madam?
Miss Bennet, you are at no loss to understand the reason of my journey. Your own conscience must tell you why I come.
Madam, I cannot account for the honor of seeing you here.
Do not trifle with me. I have been told that Miss Elizabeth Bennet would, in all likelihood, be soon married to my nephew, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. I know it to be a scandalous falsehood. Still, I instantly resolved to make my sentiments known to you.
If you believe it possible to be true, I wonder your ladyship took the trouble of coming so far. What did you hope to accomplish?
I came to hear the report contradicted.
If such report exists, surely your coming to Longbourn to see me and my family will confirm it.
Do you pretend to be ignorant of it? Do you not know that such a report is spread about?
I never heard it.
And can you declare that it has no foundation?
Your ladyship may ask questions. I may choose to not answer.
I insist upon satisfaction, Miss Bennet. Has my nephew made you an offer of marriage?
Your ladyship has declared it impossible.
It ought to be so. But your arts and allurements may have made him forget what he owes to himself and to his family. You may have drawn him in.
If I have, I'm the last person to confess it.
Miss Bennet, do you know who I am? As Mr. Darcy's aunt, I am entitled to know his concerns.
But you are not mine.
Do not misunderstand me. This match can never take place. Never. Mr. Darcy is engaged to my daughter. Now, what have you to say?
If this is true, you have no reason to suppose Mr. Darcy will make an offer to me.
The engagement between them is of a peculiar kind. While they were in their cradles, my sister and I planned their union. Do you not see that honor, decorum, nay, interest, forbid you marrying my nephew? Yes, interest, Miss Bennet, for you will be slighted and despised by everyone connected with him.
Surely the wife would be so extraordinarily happy that she cannot possibly suffer such heavy misfortunes.
Obstinate, headstrong girl. Tell me once for all, are you engaged to my nephew?
I am not.
And will you promise me never to enter into such an engagement?
I will do nothing of that.
Miss Bennet, I am shocked and astonished. I shall not go away until you have given me the assurance I require.
And I shall.
I had hoped to spare you this last humiliation, but your insolence invites it. I am no stranger to the particulars of your sister's elopement. I know all. George Wickham's marrying her was a patched-up business at my nephew's expense. Oh, you used your arts well. My nephew must have spent £5,000 or £6,000 to save your family from disgrace. His generosity might at least appeal to your gratitude, if not your sense of decency.
Oh, madam,
Heaven knows Darcy has reason enough to keep away from Wickham's flirtations and entanglements. However, you have mixed him up in them again to the tune of £5,000. But that is not enough. You want to make Lydia my nephew's sister, and George Wickham his brother. Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
Madam, you insult me in every possible manner. This is beyond endurance.
Selfish girl. You are then resolved to have him?
Lady Catherine, I have nothing further to say.
Do not imagine your ambition will be gratified. You will see what it is to rouse my displeasure. I take no leave of you, Miss Bennet. You deserve no such attention.
Lizzie, dear, what is it? Is there new trouble?
Jane, there is no end of trouble. Lady Catherine has been here.
Lady Catherine?
She says it was Darcy who paid all the money to Wickham. It was Darcy who saved us, and she says I persuaded him. I ensnared him, and she has insulted me.
My dear Lizzie, there must be some mistake. It was my good uncle who paid.
No, Jane. My aunt's hints in the letter. You know I didn't want to show it to you. Then what Lydia let fall and her fear of Wickham's anger.
Well, dear, Mr. Darcy's motive is clear enough, and that should give you no pain.
He feels he's responsible because he was silent about Wickham's true character. He told me all this would never have happened had he done his duty. And now he will despise us. He'll never wish to see us again as long as he lives.
The young gentleman from Netherfield is here, madam.
Oh, Jane, I cannot see them.
Miss Jane, I'm so happy to see you again. Miss Elizabeth, it is good to be back at Longbourn.
Miss Bennet, believe me, I should not have followed my friend. I only expected to ride with him to the lodge, but I met my aunt coming away from here, and from something she said, I feared she might have distressed you.
Miss Jane is going to show me the hermitage. We shall be back directly.
Forgive my intrusion. I'll go.
No, stay, Mr. Darcy. Excuse my own incivility. I'll be myself in a moment. Mr. Darcy, your aunt has told me of our overwhelming obligation to you. Thank you for your unexampled kindness to my poor sister.
Damn! I beg your pardon, Miss Bennet. I beg your pardon. What right has my aunt to meddle in my affairs? How dare she give you such distress?
It's far better that we know the truth, Mr. Darcy. I can never express to you our obligation.
Miss Bennet, the obligation was entirely my own. I only did what was my decent, plain duty. I told you, if I had spoken, this never would have happened.
Yes, I remember. But you exaggerated your responsibility. Of course, my father will see you about your loan to us. I would not have Lady Catherine think.
Oh, I will settle matters with Lady Catherine. Have no fears on that score, Miss Bennet. She shall be set right, I assure you.
Thank you. And for all your trouble, your kindness. My family can never repay you.
Your family owes me nothing. I owe you a great deal, Miss Bennet. More than you can know. And I want you to understand me better. I really not am the pretentious prig I must have seemed to you. I wish you could forgive my abominable pride.
I will, on one condition, that you forget my unwarrantable prejudice.
I really think, after all, my aunt has done us an enormous service.
Well, Lady Catherine loves to be useful. Jane and Bingley, is that by your permission?
Yes, I told you I had been kinder to my friend than to myself. It is my own fault. My selfish conceit has wounded you past help. Every sentiment of your nature has felt it, seen it.
But there is one sentiment they say is blind.
Miss Bennet?
My dearest Mr. Darcy, I see nothing except you.